The more renewable resources you have in a country, the more consistent the energy production is. Because you look down one of the streets and you see the steam coming out from one of those manhole covers. Like, where's that steam coming from?
Ethiopia is one of the most interesting Bitcoin mining stories.
They're taking that energy, this gas that normally they would burn off, and they're running Bitcoin miners with it.
Why is Bitcoin always associated with El Salvador? Most of crypto, in my opinion, is going to go to zero. Bitcoin itself is one of the most polarizing and interesting investments out there. Something I'm really into. Welcome to episode 2 of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. We're fired up. My name's Austin Bronner. If you guys don't know me, my co-host here is Cody Shirk. We're fired up. Second episode. We're getting back into it, and yeah, the whole goal of this podcast. This is an experiment. We want to talk about adventure, business. We want to talk about the stories that are happening that don't get covered as much in the media, and talking about how you can make some money doing things that maybe other people won't do or going places other people can't go. So it's going to be an interesting podcast. Again, it's an experiment. Today, we're fired up because we're talking about 21st century mining, Bitcoin mining, what's going on. So Cody, give us a rundown. Why are you fired up about this topic today?
Well, I want to start with a disclaimer first, because I feel like anytime we bring up Bitcoin, my dad or that generation is just like, oh, that's the you drug dealers, what illegal activities are you doing here? And so we're not going to dive into Bitcoin like as far as like the use cases, because probably if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know a lot about it already. I think what we want to focus on more is what are other countries doing around the world? How can you get involved? And why does it matter? Like, what does this mean for the next 5-10 years for Bitcoin and obviously other cryptocurrencies, but specifically Bitcoin? And why, if you're in the US or you're in Europe or wherever you are, you should be paying attention to other parts of the world, because that's what is happening as we speak and what will be happening for the next several years. It's unstoppable at this point.
What we're talking about today, there's a massive disconnect between the way that people think about Bitcoin and even governments speak about Bitcoin and what they're actually doing, right? This is like one of the more interesting things. So we're going to dive in today into how these different countries around the world are actually using their excess energy to mine Bitcoin and then hold it as a reserve currency. So it's very interesting. And Bitcoin itself is one of the most polarizing and interesting investments out there, something I'm really into. So let's kind of dive into it. Today. Like, kind of the goal is to go talk about what these countries are doing, and also talk about how you can potentially play some of these things and what it might mean for you. So let's dive into El Salvador.
Yeah,
El Salvador is one of the most interesting countries out there today. What are they doing in El Salvador, and why is Bitcoin always associated with El Salvador?
So El Salvador has adopted Bitcoin as an official store of value and a way to exchange goods through Bitcoin. So you can make Bitcoin payments. But I want to be clear that Bitcoin itself can be a little bit cumbersome. So for example, if I was to hand you a piece of paper that's a fiat dollar bill, US dollar bill, from me to you, like, that's really easy, right? Bitcoin, I can transfer, phone to phone, but that's going to be a little more cumbersome. But the point is that El Salvador is looking at Bitcoin as a store of wealth. And it's looking at that because, number one, it's much easier for somebody to say, I have X amount of Bitcoin that I own, versus I'm carrying around a sack of gold coins. So to store your wealth, it's actually much easier to do that with Bitcoin. And there's tons of other arguments, but the point is that El Salvador is looking at Bitcoin as a store of wealth. And for nation states around the world, they're looking at Bitcoin now as an alternative to gold. Because gold, yes, you can put in a vault. It proves that you have certain amounts of value that your country,
sound money.
Yeah, yes. Your country has accumulated. You can back your currency with this. But now governments are saying, wait, Bitcoin's this other alternative. Maybe it's better than gold. Maybe it's more efficient, but also it's more transparent. One country can say, how much Bitcoin do you have? And it's verifiable. It's on the blockchain. You can look. Oh, El Salvador has X amount. And other countries are scratching their head going, it's not a bad idea, especially because with gold reserves, the U.S. is the #1 gold holder in the world. But are they? Does anybody go into Fort Knox? That's kind of the whole Rand Paul audit the Federal Reserve. No one really knows what's going on down there. And, maybe we do.
And there's incentive to keep it secret.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe we do have that gold. Maybe the U.S. does have that gold, but maybe they don't.
Yeah.
And then there's also confusing part. Some countries store their gold and other countries. So the UK and London is famous for holding gold bullion for other countries. But why would you have another country store your gold? That's crazy. Where Bitcoin, you can hold the keys. You can say, hey, I have custody over this value on the blockchain. And this certifies that my country has this amount of wealth. So anyways, I want to get that clear because that's how countries are looking at Bitcoin right now. Yes, they're looking at it from a transaction value, but they're more looking at it from, hey, how do we verify that our country is worth X amount of money? And how do we make that clear for other people looking in? So El Salvador is the first country in the world to adopt this strategy. And like I said, other countries are scratching their head and going, this might work out pretty well.
And it has.
Yep.
That's the thing. It's been one of those things where they got some criticism because when the price of Bitcoin dropped, it was like, oh, is this actually a good decision? And then the price of Bitcoin rocketed back up, and guess what? They're well in the black.
Yep.
And so they've received criticism, and they've also now at the other side, they've done quite well with their trades.
Absolutely. So that's the first part that is just important to realize. The other part, as it pertains to El Salvador and these other countries we're going to discuss, is how are these countries accumulating Bitcoin? How are they holding it? Are they paying with their money? Like, how are they doing this? And you mentioned in the intro, which is they're using excess energy from their country to mine Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And El Salvador is a tiny country in Central America.
But why does that matter? Because one of the biggest criticisms of Bitcoin is the fact that it uses tons of energy, right? And guess what? Countries are now using excess energy. This is the thing where there's some confusion. Like, there are countries that have excess energy that they don't really have a use for, and what are they putting it towards?
Yep. So in the case of El Salvador, tiny country, but they have a lot of volcanoes there. So it's essentially heat being released by the earth, and they have a power plant that runs off this heat. And yes, during the evening times when there's high energy load, or during, say, the morning time when people are watching TV, making breakfast and all that, they can consume all that power. But in the middle of the night, the earth is still letting off all this heat, and the energy is still being converted through these power plants. But unless you have an enormous battery or some sort of power, holding device, which they don't, it basically goes to waste. But now they're taking that excess energy and they're running mining machines to mine Bitcoin. And what they're essentially doing is they're taking a renewable resource from the earth and converting it into a store of value, which is Bitcoin. So it's pretty incredible because you think of Tesla power packs on the wall where you store energy. And yes, there is ways to store energy through batteries, but at the scale that the earth lets off energy, there's really no other way to efficiently do it other than mining Bitcoin and put it in these batteries. But for a country such as El Salvador, they're a tiny country, but all of a sudden they have all this natural energy coming from the earth, and they convert that to value. That's crazy. It could be transformational for them as a country.
I mean, we talked about this being 21st century mining. It's the same as if they discovered gold, right? The only difference is, you can argue it's cleaner, right? Because they're taking this energy from a volcano, turning it into a store of value, and then securing their currency reserves.
Absolutely. And so, again, El Salvador is the perfect example, but it's just the tip of the iceberg around the world when it comes specifically to renewable energy and energy that would normally get blown off or get wasted or just go into the atmosphere or not captured. So it's opening up like Pandora's box for a lot of these countries saying, we can convert this energy that we have into wealth.
Totally. I think there was a headline, they mined 474 Bitcoins during the last 3 years, I think, or maybe it was less than that.
And to be clear, that's a fraction of what the country actually owns.
Totally. That's just what they mined.
Right.
Yeah.
From heat
from the volcano.
From the earth. Exactly. Which is just like, oh wow, that's just some free money over here. Yeah. Let's just pick this off.
So El Salvador is not the only country doing it.
Yep. There's literally dozens more.
Argentina.
So Argentina, a similar situation. It's been making the headlines recently. Everyone knows about their hyperinflation there, their mismanagement. And they obviously have a new president now that's turning things around. We'll see how that goes. But one of the interesting things about Argentina, they're another country that's extremely resource rich, and they drill oil. Well, when you drill oil, one of the big byproducts is gas. And it's pretty difficult to capture gas unless you have infrastructure to really do that properly. So a lot of oil production operations just burn the gas off. And if you've ever driven by an oil field or seen one of those oil derricks, sometimes you'll see a little pipe sticking in the air and there's a little flame on it.
Yeah.
And that flame is burning off the flammable gas. Well, that's energy right there. So what they're doing in Argentina is they're taking that energy, this gas that normally they would burn off or would go into the atmosphere, and they're running Bitcoin miners with it. And this, again, is one of those things that's it's free energy, and the Argentinians are thinking, like, we can
convert this into wealth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so for a private company, interesting, like if you're a capitalist, if you're a company saying, I want to drive profits, like, of course you're going to do that. If you're a nation state or you're some country that manages its resources, you're going to scratch your head and go, like, we should do this for our country. If you're a country that is not in the G7 and you're not in the top tier GDP producers, but your country's rich with resources, like, heck yeah, you're going to look at these options and you're going to convert that energy that's in your land to a store of wealth, which is now Bitcoin. Because you can't, this isn't alchemy. You can't convert that flame into gold. And if gold is the old school store of value, cool. But
this is as close to alchemy as it,
for sure,
as it ever has become.
Maybe that should have been the title for this, 21st Century Alchemy.
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay.
That is the title for it now.
Okay, we'll convert it.
But the same thing was happening in Guyana, which is interesting, right? We were down there, met with the executives at Exxon. One of the big projects they're working on was a gas to energy power plant. And there's all this excess natural gas that was coming from when they were, drilling offshore, and they're converting that into energy. They're not doing that. They're not then taking that and turning it into Bitcoin, but it's the same sort of thing, but they've got this excess energy and they're finding a use for it. And that was one of the biggest things in Guyana, was they're very excited about the energy and what's coming from this natural gas.
And to be clear, that was our last episode we talked about. You can go back and listen to that.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about specifically, they're taking the gas from the oil drilling and they're running a whole new power plant, which is going to cut power prices in half for Guyana. That's another bullish reason for Guyana, is that now they can run a lot more electricity, whether that's data centers or crypto mining in the future. We don't know.
Totally.
But
manufacturing.
It could totally transform their economy.
Totally. Okay, so let's go through some other countries, other interesting things. So let's talk about Kenya. What's happening in Kenya?
So Kenya is interesting, and there's actually a lot of African nations that this is one of those, as an adventure capitalist, interesting spot in the world, because many African nations have taken this quantum leap in technologies and energy production. So, some rural areas went from having no internet to all of a sudden the whole country has internet from these towers and whatnot.
Yeah.
So Kenya.
And then Starlink, we're just like you skipped landlines, you're skipping direct to satellite internet.
Exactly. Yeah. So Kenya has a lot of renewable energy sources, and this is mostly through solar, geothermal, or water, like big dams, so hydroelectricity. But again, going back to the El Salvador analogy, you have high times of the day where people are consuming power, but a river doesn't stop flowing at night. The geothermal production from the earth doesn't stop. It just keeps going. So the more renewable resources you have in a country, typically the more consistent the energy production is. Like, for example, in the U.S., if you have a coal power plant or China coal power plant, you can ramp up electricity production depending on demand. Well, these places like Africa, using renewable resources, you're going to have that constant energy production. And so when you're not using that energy production for people, for the consumers, well, use it for crypto mining.
Totally.
And again, this is a perfect example we talked about in the last episode about the resource curse. A lot of these countries, especially in Africa, have been doomed by their countries are super rich in resources. You have a private company come in, essentially steal all the wealth, take it out of the country. Nothing gets reinvested back into the country. And the locals are like, what the hell? You just stole all our gold, silver, rare earth metals, which was our country's wealth. It's not being reinvested. So this is kind of an opportunity for African nations such as Kenya to say, this is our wealth. This is our country's production of energy, and we're not exporting it to Europe. We're exporting it to our Bitcoin mining machine, and we're going to convert it to wealth.
And one key difference is that there's transparency, right? And this is one of the biggest when we talk about the resource curse, right? There's always been two sides. There's been other nations, and they've got also internal politicians who are disguising the amount of money being pulled out, shifting it, putting it into their own pockets. There's lots of players that are happening, but when it's on the blockchain, it's verifiable how much they're mining, how much wealth is coming out. And then guess what? Theoretically, the local population would have transparency into how much money is being made and then where that money is going.
Absolutely. And that's one of the misnomers of Bitcoin in general. Everyone thinks it says dark web, secret money. And for sure, there was some circumstances like that in the past where it has been like that. But the blockchain is very transparent. You can look at transactions. You can look what is going on.
Totally.
And so for countries that are producing Bitcoin from their excess energy,
they can show this is how much we made.
Yep.
This is where it's going. This is how we're using this on this project, so on and so forth.
And it's transparent for the nation itself, so the people, the citizens, can feel confident of what's going on in their country, but other countries can look into as well. So if you're a country that's, say, not resource rich, maybe you're human capital rich, like a Singapore or something, Singapore's tiny, you could say, oh, well, I'm going to look at this other country, Kenya, and go, whoa, like they're making a lot of, they're storing a lot of their wealth. They figured out this alchemy game, and they're doing really good at it.
I've been in some other places because it's interesting stuff happening. So let's stay in Africa and talk about Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is one of the most interesting Bitcoin mining stories. Let's talk what's happening in Ethiopia. You're talking about natural resources. What's happening in Ethiopia? Why is it such a big story, and why are so many Bitcoin miners moving to Ethiopia?
Yeah, so Ethiopia is another similar story with the renewable resources, the renewable energy. Ethiopia is actually historically, it's been kind of the central of Africa. There's been a huge kingdom there. There's been a lot of power there, but the past several decades, they've had a lot of problems, a lot of political turmoil, a lot
famine.
Oh yeah, hyperinflation with their currency, all kinds of trade issues, et cetera, et cetera. But they have huge water resources there, the huge river, and they generate a lot of their electricity through this renewable fashion. So for Ethiopia, again, looking back thousands of years ago, there were this major kingdom in Africa, and they've kind of fallen by the wayside because of the past couple centuries of essentially third parties going in and pillaging their resources, taking it out, and not really reinvesting back into the country. So, we'll see what happens over the coming years, but I feel like Ethiopia could be one of those like prime examples of a country really taking hold of their resources and converting it into wealth.
And they are running their own miners, and there's also mining companies that are moving there and paying and guaranteeing energy. They have a massive dam. And from what I understand, they've attracted miners who are literally going and setting up Bitcoin mines right next to the dam.
Yep.
And then guaranteeing payment for the energy. And then I also believe they're mining Bitcoin themselves.
Yes. So
it's kind of it's interesting because they have this massive dam. They were selling energy, and they have excess energy. Again, there is like this idea that energy is completely scarce, which there's truth behind it, and at the same time, there's excess energy.
Yep.
Which can be very confusing when you think of like climate change and all the controversies related to energy.
Yeah, and you're right. That is one of those, I guess, things that people don't realize. But there's tons of energy in the earth, an enormous amount. And it's a matter of us being able to convert that into
something valuable. Yeah,
exactly. But even to convert, say, the solar energy of the sun, I forget the exact amount, but it's a pretty small amount of the earth that would absorb the sun's rays per day that could power the entire globe.
Yeah. But you're talking about the solar panels.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
But building that,
people talk about like you cover like part of Nevada, you could, power the entire Earth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously that's an infrastructure project that would be very difficult to pull off. But the point is that there's tons of energy everywhere. It's a matter of how we capture this efficiently and convert it into something. And for Bitcoin specifically, this is an interesting way to convert it to wealth. So back to the Ethiopia part, as far as companies coming in, that's another part that's very interesting for these companies. Okay, so instead of a mining, like a traditional mining, pickaxes digging into the earth, I'm going to grab this gold or diamond, blood diamonds. We've heard about that and all throughout Africa. Take it from the country and leave. Well, now these African nations say, like, no, like, you can come help us. You can do business with us. You're a publicly traded company in the U.S. that's a Bitcoin miner. Like, yeah, come on over. We'll do business with you. But this is our game now. We own this resource. We own this power. You can help us convert this energy into Bitcoin, but like, we know what's going on now. This is transparent. It's on the blockchain. Like we're the ones in charge now.
We are the captain now.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Finland, really interesting. So there's a story that comes out. It says Finland's households turn to Bitcoin mining to heat homes. Bitcoin enthusiasts in Finland have integrated 2 Bitcoin mines with district heating facilities, enabling heating homes while mining Bitcoin.
So this one I went down the rabbit hole on, and it's one of those things. I'm like, if this happens, then that happens, and if that happens, then this happens.
Yeah.
So what I started to think about was in New York, and the classic scene in New York is you look down one of the streets, like in a movie, and you see the steam coming out from one of those manhole covers.
Totally.
You're like, where's that steam coming from? Like, what's hot? I mean, I know the weather's cold; it's a winter day. But there's steam lines running all over
totally.
New York.
Everybody knows that. That image is so. It's from every movie in the 90s.
It's a classic kind of like dramatic look, and that steam is produced by boilers and all different types of energy producers within New York.
Yeah.
But anyways, over in Finland, they have similar type systems, but instead of a power plant running like a boiler to make steam, they're capturing geothermal energy. You know, you can think of all the hot springs and banya and sauna and all that from Finland. Well, a lot of that's natural.
Yeah.
And what they've done is they capture the energy, put it into pipes, and those pipes have run around to homes. And this is pre-Bitcoin. This has been going on for a while. And the homes convert that steam into to heat their home and whatnot and run energy. Well, as you just said, they figured out a way to essentially tack on to this whole system and mine Bitcoin for free, basically off a system that they already have.
Yep.
It's free. It's geothermal energy.
The energy's coming out. Again, excess energy. It's being used to heat homes and mine Bitcoin.
Yeah, and the actual miners produce heat. So sometimes I saw another thing where
they're using the heat from the miner.
Yeah, to heat the home. So it's almost like, okay, I'm gonna take this energy source, and right before I heat my home directly with it, I'm going to run it through this miner, mine some Bitcoin. And so in the Finland's case, and other nations have this situation where they have geothermal energy and there's steam systems throughout the infrastructure of their city. Obviously, the city or government could control that. And it could be a sovereign wealth type of production. But the individuals can start to do that as well. So that's where, like, you know, the adventure capitalist theme of where you can really start thinking about this is, okay, where in the world is there this free energy, and like what countries are gonna harness this, and at what point is this some kind of high in the sky idea that no one really cares about, when all of a sudden everyone's brain clicks and goes like, holy shit, this is going to change the world. This is going to change the balance of what country has value. This is going to change the balance of what individuals have value. You know, if you live up in, you know, Finland in the north, it's super cold and you don't really have much economic opportunity. But all of a sudden there's a way.
Kind of.
Yeah. Well, now.
I mean, Finland is also.
Yeah.
They have economic opportunity.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. I just mean like through you know, I'm sitting whatever in the snow and I should be my human capital. But now all of a sudden you can have opportunity through.
Sure. You're not like farming in the winter.
Right,
example.
exactly.
You're not mining gold.
You're passively making money from the land that you're on without.
I mean, it is funny. We'll have to put the clip. I'll have to find the link. But I don't know if you saw I think it was a janitor at a school that had set up a bunch of Bitcoin mines hidden in like this back area.
Yeah.
And was mining and making all this money, and then they finally were like, the school was like trying to track down, like, why do we have these insane energy bills, like insane? And they finally like caught up to it and then arrested him, and he was just like, I have no idea what, like, he completely denied it. And there was multiple mines set up, like all this. It was
Yeah,
like,
I've seen stories like that. Or there's a kid that runs an extension cord from his like house down the street
Exactly.
to like this street light that he found to plug in, and just mining Bitcoin in his back room, and the public's paying for it all.
Totally.
Pretty wild.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think it's looking at, like, if you haven't reading the Bitcoin Standard, if you're not that familiar with Bitcoin, it's a great book to start with, because it talks a lot about like the history of money and why Bitcoin is, quote, sound money, and how money has evolved through time. And one of the most important components of sound money is how challenging is it to inflate. And the more challenging it is for people with a vested interest to inflate the money, the more sound the money is. Now, gold has been the, quote, gold standard for a long time, because it's almost impossible to increase the amount of gold removed from the earth, no matter how much you ramp up mining. It's a very, very difficult thing. Even if you put up more mines, it's still a very laborious process, and it's hard to increase the amount that comes out every single year. And with Bitcoin, one of the reasons it's so incredibly valuable is that it's a limited supply. There's only so much Bitcoin, and it's some of these countries are starting. When I said at the beginning of this podcast that there's what people say about it, what countries say, and then what they do. And what we're increasingly seeing is more and more countries are getting involved with mining and using this as reserve currency. Again, we've gone through Finland, Ethiopia, Kenya, Mexico's involved, Australia's involved. Like, what's going on in Mexico?
So Mexico, again, is a similar situation with renewable resources. They're actually looking at waste, though. So you can look at, say, it's sewage waste or actual like trash dump waste, off gases, gas.
Excess energy.
Exactly. And so there's companies down there trying to figure out, how do we capture this excess energy that's actually man-made? I mean, it's waste from humans.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of countries capture that gas and they try and convert it to energy to power homes or whatnot. It's a pretty inefficient process to do that. I'm sure in the future we'll figure out a way to really get that dialed in. But these companies are looking specifically, how do we convert this waste, the off-gassing from this waste, to wealth?
It's regenerative Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. And again, it's just one of those things where you start to think like, okay, what happens next? What happens next? And you're like, whoa, the whole world can change from this as far as who has the power.
Yeah.
Like literally the energy, but also the wealth power as well.
Totally.
It's one of those concepts where, again, going back a couple of centuries, you have the European colonies going over to the Americas and Africa and essentially stealing or taking all of these resources. And the reason they could do that is because they had technology such as a ship and navigation and transportation hubs and different colonies. And that was the technology back then that set them apart. Well, that doesn't really matter as much now. And now that everything's moving to the cloud, everything's digital, the rules are going to change and the power dynamics are going to change. So these countries for a long time that have been at the bottom of the pecking order of power, I mean, that whole thing could be flipped pretty soon.
Well, also the fact that technology can transfer so much faster today than it did previously, right? It's like, well, if you were massively isolated in Western Europe and you were creating, ships and guns and all these different things, those didn't transfer. Now they're skipping entire levels of technology. Like you said, most things are in the cloud. You can up level much, much quicker.
Absolutely. And then it goes back to the human capital part. Okay, so maybe your country's behind on technology.
But you may have human capital.
Exactly. You take this quantum leap, now you're converting your renewable resources to Bitcoin or to some sort of digital wealth. And then all of a sudden you have this wealth to reinvest back into your population. And whether that's healthcare, education, or whatnot, you can then take that quantum leap again to then leverage your population to do whatever the next thing is to fuel your empire.
So let's touch on a couple more. So Australia. Australia is also getting involved. What is Australia doing?
Yeah, Australia, again, another extremely resource-rich country, but the western half, so the Perth and northern area, has got a lot of oil and gas and mining operations there, but like relatively very low population. And again, another scenario where you have a way to take these resources, traditional resources, and then they get shipped around the world because they're not being produced or consumed in Australia.
Yeah.
The oil, gas is not being consumed there. There's obviously tons of energy that's not being captured there correctly or just burned off, like the Argentina situation. But now Australia, they're like, we should be capturing this and we should be converting it to a digital currency. And Australia, yes, they are I would say a first world country in the sense they have a sophisticated financial system. They have a sophisticated population with first world cities. But again, that part of their country is very sparsely populated.
When you go to Australia, you just realize you're like, this is a massive country with so few people. So few people. They just do not have the labor that other places have.
So yeah, if you can convert those resources now to a wealth that stays domestically in Australia, again, Australia is already doing well, but it could be a transformational again for them.
And again, back to the things like when countries are saying one thing, we have our own country. There's battles going on about cryptocurrency that increasingly politicians are shifting back and forth on their stance with public opinion, right? Some people are trying to fight against it, ban it. Other ones are trying to embrace it. The reality is all these countries that are mining them, when they get Bitcoin, they can use that to buy. Countries aren't going to say, no, I'm not going to accept your Bitcoin.
Right. Well, that's the whole point. It's this store of wealth similar to gold, saying like, well, they're using it over here. Why can't we use it over here? Why can't we use it
over here?
Can totally shift the power dynamics.
Super, super interesting. Okay, so what does this mean for the average person?
Yeah, and
I mean, we've kind of gone all over, right? And I think it's interesting, but like, what does this mean for the average person?
So I think for the average person, and we've talked about this before, we're cautious about going down this Bitcoin rabbit hole because, I mean, there's literally entire podcasts, seasons, companies focused on Bitcoin. And I don't want to go down that too much. But if you're not involved in Bitcoin right now, like, just get involved. Set aside $100, figure out how to trade it, figure out how to store it. This
set
is
up a
coming.
Coinbase account.
Yeah, this is coming.
Yeah.
You don't have to you don't have to invest in it. Just start messing around with it because this is coming. Countries are already positioning themselves to use this. So it would be a huge disservice to yourself to not at least get ahead of the 8 ball here. So that's the first thing.
And an easy way to do this, right? Like you said, set up a Coinbase account.
Mm-hmm.
Start buying like $100 a week.
Yep.
Something as simple as that. And over time, what'll happen is you start paying more attention to what's happening.
Absolutely. And again, the whole getting comfortable with making a transaction or just holding it yourself and figuring out how that works is going to make you feel more comfortable and also grasp what these countries are doing and why it's important and why this is this, really wealth changing, world changing type of idea. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, okay, if you're an adventurer, you're a capitalist, you're an explorer, you like going out in the world and seeing things. Well, these countries and towns that have renewable energy that haven't traditionally been able to store it in wealth, there could be boom towns going on right now. And so Africa is a perfect example. You have all these renewable energy sources in Africa, and for the most part, it's going to waste. Well, if they start converting this to wealth, there's going to be some cities and countries in Africa that absolutely change. And so for an entrepreneur investor, now's the time to get on the ground, go to one of these places, start poking around, start talking to people. And it's small enough and we're early enough now where if you went to, Kenya or Ethiopia or Congo or these other countries that do have these renewable energy sources, and you start talking to people about this topic, like you're gonna get connected. You're gonna start figuring out really quickly who the players are and how you can get involved, and whether you're actually working with the crypto miner or some sort of picks and shovels industry right next to it. These things are developing, and this is a huge opportunity for people to get involved.
I was reading about I think it was a Bitcoin miner that has just been ripping for the last year and a half. And I think it was in Qatar. I'll find the link and put it up. But investment opportunities, if you're looking for, so you get involved with Bitcoin. Also, there are miners that you can find and you can invest in that are publicly traded.
So there's
Like,
about a dozen or more.
Yeah.
I mean, the most well-known ones is Marathon
Yeah.
or Riot, Blockchain. I'm not going to name all of them because there's tons of them. But actually, Marathon's the one that's in
That's
Africa.
ripping.
Yeah, it's ripping. But
Yeah.
also, they're making a deal with the African nations. They're there right now as we speak. So when this gets published, it may be different. But their representatives are literally there right now talking to the politicians. How do we make a deal? And if maybe you can't fly to Africa or whatever, you can buy some shares of this company if you believe that they're going to pull this off.
Get involved. I think
Totally.
the thing that I always think about with Bitcoin, it's like, and why it's been interesting to me from the beginning is there's always been people who I felt like I'm like, that person is way smarter than I am, and they are massively interested in Bitcoin, and they're an evangelist for Bitcoin. Like, why is that? What is it? And that was really like the question that started pushing me down the rabbit hole is like, these people I really trust. At the beginning, I don't totally understand why, but it's enough of a signal for me to go into it further.
Yep. And that's for me. I mean, I was very early to Bitcoin. I have a classic story of losing it and going through the whole thing, and then buyer's remorse, and then I'm jaded against it. About a couple of years ago, a good friend of mine, I told you this before, very wealthy guy, owns lots of homes. A couple of years ago, he just sold all of his homes. I mean, we're talking a very large portfolio of real estate, went all into Bitcoin. And it was one of those circumstances, like you said, you see smart people, you see smart people doing this, and you're like, what's going on here? Like, how did this really wealthy guy just totally change his mind and go all in on something that most people think is crazy right now?
Totally. There's a great tweet that I read on, it was like, how can you tell if somebody is, incredibly, like, what's the most reliable predictor of somebody's really high IQ? And one of the responses that got the most likes was, they make decisions that seem incredibly risky and they consistently pay off for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's one of the things, again, most of crypto, in my opinion, is going to go to zero. Most coins.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some, like Bitcoin, ETH, Sol, that I think are past the point. They've like reached escape velocity. They're not going to go to zero. And it's interesting to just look at people that have made these consistently, quote unquote, risky decisions that have paid off over and over again. And again, you're starting to see now who's following them. The nation states are starting to get more and more involved. And who's to say that the U.S. doesn't make a large bet, right?
Well, like a sign of high IQ is being able to change your mind. Like most people, when you've learned something, you don't want to change your mind because you feel like you're stupid.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought one thing, now I'm going to change my mind. And you're like, oh, you're wishy-washy.
Oh, yeah, flip-flopper. Classic, flip-flopper.
But if you learn new information, I'm like, I'll change my mind.
Yeah.
And someone who's really smart, they're constantly changing their mind on new information. And that's the perfect thing for Bitcoin. Like, if you're super hard against Bitcoin or you're super like, oh, this is a scam, like, I challenge you to change your mind.
The best forward of any book I've ever read is the forward for Bitcoin Standard. It's written by Michael Saylor. If you're an author, there's nothing better than this. He literally wrote, it's like 2 pages. He's like, I think it was 2018 or something. He's like, I own no Bitcoin. I read the Bitcoin Standard, and then I bought $100 million worth of Bitcoin. That's basically the entire forward.
He's so wishy-washy. What a flip-flopper.
It's like, as an author, like, that type of impact is insane.
And if you don't know Michael Saylor, he's now worth billions of dollars.
Billions of dollars. The ultimate Bitcoin bull.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy has insane conviction.
Yeah. And one quick story I want to add is that there's right now, we don't know what's going to happen, but there's this Mr. 100. We talked about
Mr. 100.
Before. And it's this account, this wallet that's been accumulating 100 Bitcoin or more per day for almost the past year. And the wallet's up to like billions of dollars now. And nobody knows who this is. At the beginning, people thought, oh, this is Bezos, this is Zuckerberg, this is Musk, whoever accumulating. They're selling off their stock in Meta and Amazon. They're buying Bitcoin. But it kept going, and it was a buy every day. And again, for Bitcoin, you can see in the blockchain, the transactions happening, and you're seeing this. And some days they're buying 400, 500, 1,000 Bitcoin a day. You're like, who is this? And then people are saying, this isn't a person. This is a nation. And then some people are saying, who is this? Is this Qatar? Is this Kuwait? Is this UAE? Who is this? And we still don't know who it is. And again, we'll find out in the coming weeks, months, years. But that goes back to, hey, there's something happening here in the world, specifically with Bitcoin, and there's countries catching on, and everyone's kind of making their moves right now. They're making their chess moves, and the vast majority of the world population has no idea what's going on. And by that time, the majority finds out, it's going to be too late for most people to get into the game. But right now is the time. And as being an venture capitalist, that's what it's all about, right? Getting into things early, getting into somewhat seemingly risky situations, even though you do the research and you realize, actually, this isn't risky. This is just something that's happening early and most people haven't paid attention to yet. So that Mr. 100 story is very interesting because, again, is this somebody? No, this has got to be a nation. This is a country accumulating Bitcoin rapidly. Who is it? I don't know. We'll find out soon.
We'll
Maybe.
find out. Or not.
Or not.
Who knows?
Yeah.
It's so, I mean, we still...
Maybe it's the U.S. That'd be crazy, right?
That would be crazy if they're just accumulating.
Just huge psyops scam.
And then they just completely flip. And they're like, we're going to finally, embrace this and dominate. Who knows? Awesome.
We'll have
Good
more
episode.
on this, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a recurring theme because, again, it's interesting, and things are changing rapidly, right? With cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, like all these things are changing rapidly, and again, all these countries are getting involved, and we're gonna have more.
And Bitcoin's a sign of freedom for individuals. It gives people like the individual power because it's storing your wealth. But it's also this weird timing. Like the world seems weird right now. Things are shifting. Are we going to have a war? Are we going to have an economic crisis? Like who's controlling the world? What's the shift? At the same time, you have this asset that's empowering people like never before. So this is a theme, like being a venture capitalist, like we're going to stick to. It's just...
For sure. And I think that I always think you're at a disadvantage if you're in the Western world, developed world, at understanding why it's important.
Mm-hmm.
Because... for the most part, U.S. banking system works well.
Mm-hmm.
Money, for the most part, very sound, right? There is inflation right now, but it's nothing like the hyperinflation that people have experienced in Argentina, Venezuela. And those countries, they move faster on it because they can see the value in having something that can't be inflated away by people.
Yep.
So anyway, hope you guys like this episode. Let us know. Again, this is us experimenting, trying things. If you like this episode, shout us out on Twitter at Abron,
at Cody Shirk.
And we'd love to hear from you. Episode 2, Venture Capitalist.